A lot of you probably don't know me, but I used to own a ski shop in town called Edgewise. And over the years, I've had a little bit of experience in ski racing, so I'm here to help you guys out with tuning and answer any questions that you might have. But I'm a former World Cup technician, founder of the Edgewise ski service in town here, former SWIX Alpine director. I was also the brand manager for SWIX. I also had another company that was called Race Tech, and we were the official race service provider for the U.S. ski team for about 5 years. And I had my own business called ASP, and we designed all the shin guards and arm guards for a lot of World Cup technicians. River Radimus both using it. And now I'm at Pinnacle. So I'm in town. If you guys have any questions on ski tuning or anything like that, ski setup, I'm always available to help you out. So feel free to come into the store and check out what we got going on. So what have I learned in my career? One of the big things I've noticed is that there's a disconnect between the athlete and equipment. Understanding your equipment, the bevels, how it's set up. And a lot of people, even at the highest levels, don't understand what's going on with their own equipment. So I use this story a lot. I was down in Chile, and I was talking to a U.S. ski team athlete, and she had 2 pairs of slalom skis with her. And she said, I really like this one pair of skis, but I don't like this other one. This other ski is it's a different model, it's a different flex, different construction. I don't really like that ski. So one of the things that we did is we'd often go through and do a 17-point inspection on the skis. We check the base bevel, side edge bevel, the construction of the ski, the flex, where the skis are mounted, what type of plate it is, the delta and the bindings. So we have a pretty good picture of the overall equipment. And what we found was the skis that this athlete had were actually exactly the same. The only difference was one pair of skis had a 1/2 degree on them, on the base, and the other pair had a 1.5 degree base bevel on the base. So she hated this one particular pair of skis, but she didn't know why. So I spent some time talking to her about what the difference is between those bevels, and we'll get into that in more detail. But, you know, we were trying to connect the dots and help athletes succeed, find what works well for them, and have an understanding of what's good for you as an athlete moving forward. But there's a lot of pieces to that puzzle. And I always talk about a pyramid of speed and what it takes to have fast skis. And you know, I'll get into this in more detail as we go through this presentation, but at the bottom it's going to be something that's really simple. It's just a base bevel, the contact with the edges to the snow, and it builds up from there, having good boots, good equipment, good base material, and then at the very peak of that structure is the wax. So I wish I could stand up and tell you here that the wax is like one of the most important things that's going to make a big difference for you. And it will if you have all these other things underneath it. But without having the base bevel set right, a good pair of boots, the right equipment, the wax isn't really going to make that big of a difference for you. So we want to make sure we have everything in place so you can be successful. One of the things that we'll talk about just to get started is the wax system and how it works. And there's been a lot of changes on the wax side of things. Namely, a lot of the race waxes were built fundamentally on an element or a chemical called fluoro, and it's a forever chemical. And what that did was it moved water really fast. It was a great dirt repellent. And we always refer to it kind of as a magic bullet. Like the fluoro wax additives really help the waxes succeed and be really good in a lot of different conditions. But the FIS and USSA phased that out, and we're no longer using fluoros in race waxes. So there's been a kind of a big change fundamentally in how we're moving water underneath your feet, doing what we used to do with old waxes. And so instead of having that one magic bullet, there's probably about 8 substances that are kind of similar, have similar qualities to fluoro, but when they all come together, they kind of perform the same way. And we found a lot of these new combinations have actually worked pretty good. So fundamentally what we're doing is we're we want to have a hard wax that's going to repel dirt. And with the new wax system from SWIX called Pro, instead of the old Sarah F platform, there's going to be two entirely new levels. There's going to be top speed and high speed, which are going to replace the high HF and LF waxes. And then the new PS level, which is down below, we'll go through this in more detail, is going to replace the old CH waxes. And that's where a lot of people are using for training or even like racing on a budget. There's a big difference in these TS and HS waxes and how they're structured. They're much harder than they used to be. So the hardness in that wax is kind of like working as a dirt repellent. And the way that we used to select race wax has changed a bit with those waxes, and I'll talk about that in more detail as we go through here. But going back to how these waxes perform, when I was working with SWIX, we actually had a test team that would travel around to all the Alpine World Cup events, and we actually had a team on the Nordic side too. It was a pretty big effort. There's like 15 people that were constantly testing waxes. But when we first started coming out with these new non-floral waxes, we had a test team in Val Gardena, Italy for the speed events. And they were testing the old HF waxes against the new non-floral waxes. And the new non-floral waxes were actually outperforming the high floral waxes, which was a kind of a big surprise to the team. So these waxes do work pretty well. You can be pretty confident in the wax selection when you're using these non-floral waxes. And it's pretty cool to see that they do work pretty well. And they're a little bit easier to work with. So the beginning of the system is performance speed. And this is going to be the waxes that replace the old CH waxes, the old hydrocarbons, the basic training waxes. These are going to be the most inexpensive waxes, easy to use. They're really safe. They come in 5 different categories for snow temperatures. And they have really good glide quality, but they're very cost effective, as I mentioned. You're going to be using these quite a bit. These waxes are actually identical to the old CH waxes. There's no difference, really. When you go into the next level up, high speed, the HS waxes are going to replace the old LF waxes. So these are what I call speed on a budget. This is your best performance for the dollar. And these really do work well. Like this HS wax is the one that outperformed the HF waxes in Val Gardena. So for the money, it's really hard to beat. Again, these waxes are going to be a little bit harder than the old system, where with the old system, if you're selecting race waxes for the day, you used to have to look at the sharpness of the snow crystal and maybe make adjustments and make the wax call a little bit harder. But these waxes are already hard, so you don't have to make any sort of adjustment for the snow crystal. You can just pick the temperature for the day and select the wax and you're good to go. It makes it really simple. TSB is top speed, and this is going to replace what we call the old VW, or Black Wolf line. These waxes work really good in extremes, dirty snow. So the additive in the wax makes the wax black, and it used to be called molybdenum, but it's actually a carbon additive with this series. And so whenever it's old snow, old transformed snow that's been injected or kind of dirty conditions, this works the best. This is going to help repel dirt and keep your skis running fast. And then we get into the next series, which is called Marathon. This is kind of cool stuff. It's kind of what I would consider a universal race wax. So in the Marathon series, it comes in a hard paraffin or a powder. You're going to see a lot of powder waxes in this new non-floral line. And the reason for that is the wax is super hard. So it makes it a lot easier to iron this wax because it's in a powder rather than trying to melt like a paraffin into the ski. It can be really difficult for people. So that powder just makes ironing and application a lot simpler than it would have otherwise been. And then these waxes, the TS powders, these are going to replace all the old HF waxes. So again, we have temperature-specific waxes here, 5 different temps. And as I mentioned before, it's a powder application because it is so hard. It's going to be a lot easier to apply with your iron. And this is when you're in this category, is when every 1/10 of a second counts. So like this wax is going to be much more expensive than the lower levels, but when you want like every 1/10 of a second, the value is there for you. Top speed turbos, these are new just a couple of years ago, and these are kind of special waxes in terms of how we apply them. It's kind of a layover the top additive, and we're taking a fluffy brush called a roto wool, and we're actually burning the wax onto that wool, and then we apply it right to the base of the ski. This is actually a really effective application, and it's very cost effective because this wax lasts a long time. You don't really have much waste when you apply that to your ski. And then we have liquids. So the liquid waxes are super easy to use, and we have them in every category. So from PS, HS, and TS, and all the different temperature ranges. And these waxes are just very easy to use. You're just going to basically put a very thin layer on the ski, and I'll show you how to do this a little bit later in the clinic. But we just want to make a really thin layer. You don't want to put too much on because the skis won't run fast if you do. So it's going to be a really quick pass, tip to tail, let it dry out, and then you just brush it for your best performance. So BP waxes, these have been around for a really long time, but a lot of people I found really don't know how to use them. And BP stands for base prep. So the base prep waxes are going to be for basically new skis for the most part. So BP 99 is going to be the yellow. It's going to be the softest out of all the base prep waxes. And BP 99 is best for a brand new ski when you want to get wax into the base without burning the base with your iron. It's going to be very easy to apply. And the 99 also works really well with a thermal bag. So if you want to heat your skis up, get that wax to drop into the base, that's the best application. BP 88, it's actually a kind of a cool story behind this one from SWIX. Atomic actually approached SWIX years ago, and they asked to have a wax that would be great for travel. So this is actually a great after race travel wax when you're getting back in the car so you can protect your skis. And then we have BP 77. This is an interesting wax. You can use it for training in the summertime on a glacier, and it actually works really well for new skis if they're freshly stone ground. It's a bit harder, so after you apply that wax, the hardness when you scrape it kind of snaps off any sort of micro hairs that are on the base, and it helps prep your skis and get your bases running fast. A new wax that just came out, I think it was last year, is the North series, but it's a different mixture than what we SWIX used to have. So this is kind of a more environmentally conscious wax, I guess you could say. It's going to be more natural ingredients. So this wax actually only has 3 ingredients. It's carnauba wax, beeswax, sunflower oil, and I think there's actually juniper oil in it too. So it's a whole product and very simple, and it works great. When we approached the team in Norway to make this wax, the wax designer wasn't too excited about it, and he didn't think it would work great. But he's pretty particular, and he said it worked so well he used it on his own skis, which is kind of a cool story. All right, so now we're just going to go through waxing procedures. All right, so before you get started, you want to clean your bases. And we have a couple different ways you can do it. So what I like to do is I like to take a nice sharp scraper. You can find one here. And just scrape off the top of the ski and make sure that it's free of any debris. Just go tip to tail. And you know, a lot of times you'll find there's a little dirt on there. And I like to use this glide wax cleaner. One of the things that's changed over the years is like this used to have fluoro in it. So with all the SWIX product, if you have old product, make sure you look at the label to see if it has this green leaf on it. And if the green leaf is there, it means it's fluoro free. Some of the old stuff does have fluoro. And so you're just going to take this base cleaner and a little bit of Fiberline, and you want to apply it to the base and clean it off here. So just a little bit, and wipe it on here. And then you just let that dry. And you can see it's pretty dirty. So that will help prep your skis and get it ready for putting on some fresh, clean wax. And then we're just going to let that dry. And after it dries completely, we're just going to take a nylon brush and brush it, and then the ski is prepped and ready to put some wax on. One of the things that I like to talk about is prepping your iron. And not many people know this, but you can actually sand your iron to make it really smooth and clean. It'll take any burrs off the iron that might exist from, you know, bumping it on the table or hitting it with a file. And so all you have to do is take some like 220 to 300 grit sandpaper, tape it down on a table, try to find a really nice flat surface. In my old store, we had a steel beam that we do this on, and you can just take your iron and just, you know, work it on that sandpaper until you see it kind of smooth out, or any of the scratches on the iron go away. So that's a really good first step. It will help your iron really glide much smoother over the ski too once you get it trued up. All right, so getting started with the wax. All of the waxes, generally speaking with most brands, are going to actually have a temperature rating right on them. So on the SWIX waxes, it's going to be right in this area here. You know, I mentioned a lot of these waxes are much harder than they used to be, so the iron temperatures are going to be higher as well. So as you're working with a hot iron, you have to be really careful not to burn your skis, and we'll talk about that in more detail. But this is going to help you get the wax into the ski quicker, and it won't make a mess too. So like if you are using a really soft wax, but you're running a really high temperature on your iron, more than likely a lot of that wax is just going to roll over the sidewalls and get all over your skis or bindings. It makes quite a mess. But if you're running the right temperature on your iron, it should be pretty clean and not really make a big mess for you. All right, so these are a couple of key things that I like to talk about when it comes to ironing. So spend the money on a good quality iron. This is a tool that you'll have your whole ski racing career. I like to use the T72. It's kind of the best iron for the money. It's really durable, it travels well, it's not too heavy. It's digital, and it really does help get the wax into the ski a lot easier, especially with the hard waxes. Use your iron lengthwise. You know, if you're using it like this, you have a much longer heating element. It's going to make it a lot easier to get the wax to drop into the ski. If you use it like that, you just reduce the heating element by 50%. And also, there's a good chance that you're going to really scratch up your iron on your edges. So always use it that way. Another thing, a lot of people think this is the front of the iron, but it's actually the back. So when you're using the iron, you want to make sure you hold it like that, because there's a beveled edge here, and it's going to help you glide over the wax much easier if you hold it in that direction. One thing too that I forgot to mention is when you're ironing, like what speed should you go? You know, a lot of people make the mistake of going like this, and they're just kind of, you know, spreading the wax around the top, or they're going really slow with it and just driving a lot of heat through the ski. What I like to do is get wax onto the ski. Get some base prep here. And don't be afraid to use the training waxes. They're pretty inexpensive. It's not going to be, it's not going to cost you a lot of money to use a decent amount of wax. But I'm going to try to make 2 passes. So I'm going to move moderate speed. I'm actually pushing down with some pressure to help distribute the wax. And so the first pass, I want to just try to get the wax somewhat distributed. The second pass, I want to drop that wax right down into the ski, and I want to see the structure kind of stand up. And that lets me know that the wax is into the ski. And one of the things that you got to be careful with is like how much heat goes in. So if I'm moving along here and I'm going really slow, and this wet trail gets to be really long behind the iron, I'm going too slow. So what I want to do is keep moving fast enough where that wet trail stays about the same size of the iron and kind of moves along the ski with me. Years ago, when I was doing service work, I worked with another technician, and we both had Rosinal athletes, and we had exactly the same skis. And he spent a lot of time doing hot scraping and brushing. He'd put the wax in, get the skis really hot, scrape it. He kept doing that over and over and over. And at the end, when he would scrape, he'd have all this black wax at the end of the ski. And he'd say, hey, look at all this dirt I'm taking out of the ski. But I had the same skis, and I was letting the skis cool off the room temperature. I wasn't getting them too hot. But when I'd scrape, I didn't have any dirt. But what I realized was he was actually planing base material off the ski. He was getting the bases so hot that he was cutting the base material, which was kind of reducing the base bevel on the ski. It was taking the structure away. And also, over time, it really started to mess with the skis themselves. And this is an example of what happens. So you start pushing all that heat through the ski, and all these different constructions within the ski are held together by epoxy resins. And they all expanded and contracted at different rates with heat. So through the season with my friend that was a technician overheating the skis constantly, at the end of the year, his skis were all warped and concave and convex. And my skis actually ended up being pretty stable. And the base bevel was good, and they were in good shape. So my philosophy with ski tuning is not to get the skis too hot. And that's kind of my big takeaway for you as a group today is you don't want to get too much heat into your bases. You got to be really careful not to drive that heat through. If you can feel heat coming through the top sheet of your ski, you're getting them too hot. So just make sure you keep that iron moving. This is one of the two ways that you can damage your skis. So just make sure you keep the iron moving. So a good way to reduce the heat. This is a pretty cool tool that just came out from SWIX. It's actually pretty inexpensive for what it is, but it's a roller waxer. It works great with big teams. You can put the wax of the day in it. It's digitally controlled. You can kind of dial it in for whatever the wax temperature is. And really, you just take the ski and you just roll it right over that roller. And you get a couple passes on that, and then you have the wax on the ski. You can iron it in at that point if you want, but you can also just scrape and brush it out. So this is a pretty cool way, especially for teams, to make sure that they're not burning their skis. All right, so we'll talk about brushing here, but first I'm going to scrape this ski off for you guys before we actually go through the brushing detail. So with scraping, just make sure you have a nice sharp scraper. Normally I wouldn't have any of my tools on the table because it makes a mess and you don't want to get this wax on any of your tools. Especially these diamond stones. Like, these things don't last long and they're pretty expensive. So, there's like a little abrasive quality like a sandpaper on there, and if you get wax on them, they're kind of smoked and they're really hard to clean. So make sure you move that stuff out of the way. And make sure you have a nice sharp scraper. There's a lot of different ways you can sharpen a scraper. I'm sure your coaches will spend some time talking to you about that. One of the ways I like to do it is simple. I can take some sandpaper, 300 grit, put it on the table, and just use my file guide as a guide, and I can just sharpen my scraper like that. There's some power routers that you can use to sharpen your scraper. But whatever you do, just make sure that you do clean it off so there's not a burr on there, and that sandpaper works great. Scraping. I see a lot of different techniques that don't work great. What I would recommend is you always start at the tip, work to the tail, hold your scraper just like that with your thumbs on the back and your fingers on the side, and you're going to scrape with a slight angle to the scraper. You don't want to get into like pulling or pushing. Usually when I see that, the scraper is probably dull and it needs to be sharpened. So make sure you start in the tip, and with scraping, we want to scrape off as much wax as we can off the top of the ski. The base material is going to be really similar to like your skin. And you know, if you are putting lotion on, you rub the lotion into your skin all the way. You know, if you don't rub it in, and you went to the beach and you got sand on you, that sand would just stick right to that lotion, right on top. And the same's true with your ski wax here. You want to make sure you scrape it off so that there's no dirt that's going to stick to it from the conditions. And it doesn't take much to get that ready to go. And while we're at it, we'll just take the scraper and knock any wax off the sidewalls and the base edge. And now we're ready to talk about scrapers. I like to keep a little bit of fiber lean-to around just to keep the skis clean. And I like 3 different brushes. A lot of manufacturers have all sorts of different brushes. There's a lot out there. But I like to work with 3 brushes and keep it simple. And it works just like sandpaper. So you're going to have your most aggressive brush, your finer brush, and then your finished brush. So it's going to be like, you know, 80 grit sandpaper, 120 grit, 220 grit sandpaper. It's kind of the same idea. You'll hear that a lot in the ski tuning side of things, like even with the diamond stones. We'll talk about that in a bit. Anyways, this is a good kit to have. If I was going to start out with one, you know, as you're getting into ski tuning, maybe I'd just buy the nylon, and then after that I would add the brass, and eventually I'd want to have this bigger metal brush, which works really good with the harder waxes. Kind of makes it a little bit easier. But we're going to take these brushes, we're going to start from tip to tail and brush the skis until they're clean. The idea here is we want to get that low-lying wax out of the structure. And really the only way to get at it is with these brushes. So we're going to start at the tip. I like to work in quarters. You know, if I'm going to do 10 passes here, I'll do 10 passes in the next quarter and just keep working my way down the ski. A lot of these brushes, if they have metal in them, they're going to have an arrow on them, which is directional. You only want to use them that way. If I flip that brush around, it's going to be super aggressive and might actually damage the ski base. So just keep working down the ski here. And then I could go to my next brush. Again, this is a metal brush, so it's going to be directional. The metal brushes don't last a really long time. You know, if you're tuning your skis every day, throughout the winter, every day you're on snow, these metal brushes might need to be replaced every year. The nylon brushes, they'll last for a while. And with the nylon brushes, you can scrub the base, move back and forth like that. It's a polishing brush, it's not going to hurt anything. And that's basically the process there. Does anybody have any questions on scraping and brushing at all?
With the metal brush, can you do as many passes as you want, or
yeah, you're not going to hurt anything. Yeah, you can go crazy with brushing. Brushing is going to break the structure in and help the skis run fast. So like if you have time to do it, you know, I just keep scraping and brushing and waxing too. But like I said, just let the skis cool down between waxings.
Yeah. And you said you don't like the idea of doing for cleaning the base, doing a hot scrape.
I don't. I would rather lean on that base cleaner that I showed you rather than a hot scrape, just because of the story that I told you about with that friend of mine. Yeah, damaging the skis. Yeah. The skis are pretty delicate, especially slalom skis. Like I would actually stay away. For me personally, I wouldn't use a paraffin wax on a slalom ski. I would stick to the liquid waxes. It's probably good every once in a while to put a layer, like maybe once a week, just to have some sort of paraffin in the base. But the liquids are a good way to keep the skis from not warping or changing, because they're just structurally not super steady. Yeah, I know a lot of World Cup technicians that only use liquids on slalom skis. This is an interesting brush. This is the Roto Wool that I was talking to you about. It does work really well. It's just a little tricky with alpine skis. It does kind of pillow and roll over the edges, which can like lead to a dull ski. Mike's actually been working on one that's a bit narrower that would be specifically for alpine skis, but with this technique, after you apply the waxes with these roto wool brushes, it's always good to go back and touch up the edges and make sure they're still sharp. Okay, so structure. I'm not going to go too deep into this, but I just want to give you a basic idea like what's going on here. So I always use the analogy that the structures that you see in the bases, you know, like that pattern that you see there, it's kind of like tires on an F1 car. And the whole idea is to create a film of water that you can glide on. And you'll see, like on a really dry track, you know, a lot of race cars will just use a slick. You know, there's no water to move at all. If it's really wet conditions and there's a tremendous amount of water, there's going to be more of a pattern in the tire. So the same is true with our skis here. Like we'll have condition-specific structures at certain levels. When it comes to the GS and the slalom ski, you can keep it pretty simple. But we do go. You can take it pretty far, so we even have structures that are specific for conditions and temperatures. Like if it's really cold and dry, the structure is going to be very fine. You want to create a layer of water that you can run on, but when it's really warm and wet, you want something that can move water under your feet pretty easy. All right, so selecting the race wax of the day. You know, I talked a little bit about the new system and how much harder the waxes are. It does make it a lot easier to select the wax of the day. What you're going to do is look at the ambient air temperature for the race at the start time. So I'd go on the hourly forecast for Stowe, I'd see what's happening for the temperature, and then I'd select that wax for the day. With the old waxes, or if you're using the PS system, you kind of have to know what the snow crystals look like. If they're really sharp crystals, you might have to bump the wax a little bit harder. But you know, with that TS wax and HS wax, they're already hard and no need to make any sort of adjustment. I would say for the second run, you know, like if you are at a race and you want to freshen up your wax, the liquid waxes are really good to use for second runs. It's almost like a racing top coat. So for second run, I would just, again, look at the ambient air temperature, spray this on, tip the tail. Actually, I'll show you really quick. So, like I said, you want to make sure you spray this quickly and you want to keep it down close to the ski, and you really want a very thin layer for the skis to run quick, so it's just like that. So really quick, tip the tail, you let that dry out, and once it's dry, you're just going to brush it out with a nylon brush. And it's very simple to apply. Talked about the snow crystals already. Select your wax performance level. I talked a little bit about this earlier, but again, PS waxes, that's the hydrocarbon, the very basic one from the old system. That's going to be speed on a budget. The HS waxes are your best performance to expense ratio, and the TS, I would say, it's kind of like when every 1/10 of a second counts. Again, new snow versus old snow. If it's old conditions, like it hasn't snowed for a while, I like to use those black waxes. Those work pretty well in those conditions to help repel dirt. If it's new snow conditions, I'll usually pick the more standard waxes that don't have the carbon additive. Again, you know, you can make some adjustments for second run by just selecting that liquid wax of the day. And that's kind of the overview on wax. Does anybody have any questions on the system or anything?
Graham, could you just talk a little bit about why you can't spray or liquid wax all the time for all skis? Just so that kids know what, like, you make it sound very attractive, especially with the slalom skis, which I get.
Yeah, it's a good point. You know, like with the slalom skis, the only reason I'm really only using liquids is because they're delicate skis and they, you know, heat's not great with the slalom skis. Although I would recommend it like once a week to use a paraffin. The rest of your skis, you can use paraffin wax, and you're going to want to use a paraffin wax often. And you know, the paraffin, what's cool about the paraffin is it really like a lotion with your skin. It gets down to your skin and protects your skin. The same's true here. And the base material can get kind of, especially close to the edge, it'll get abraded and beat up just from heat. So are any of you familiar with base burn at all? Do you know that term? So what happens is, and it's pretty amazing this actually happens, when you're skiing and you slide on ice, it creates so much heat with the edge, it actually burns the base material right next to the edge and it disappears. And really the only way to fix that is by stone grinding the ski and getting that out. And it can be a lot of work. When I had my store up here, a lot of racers would wait too long, and I'd have to take a lot of base material out of the ski to get it flat and true again. But making sure that you have some good paraffin wax in the ski protects the ski, and it helps prevent that base burn. So it's a good point. You gotta make sure you're waxing your skis. It's putting gas in the tank of your car. Your car's not going to go very far without gas, and you got to make sure you're putting the wax in your skis too. Kind of a mandatory thing to be a ski racer. Any other questions?
Yeah. How do you feel about paste wax?
Paste wax?
Like dominating.
Yeah, well, the paste wax works good too. This liquid spray, they actually do make it in a paste version as well. Again, it's the same thing. You know, you can use it with slalom skis. Make sure, you know, I would use it as a support tool. You know, it's quick and easy. There's going to be times when you just don't have time to wax. You know, look at it like that. I'm going to use it when I really just need to. But whenever you do have a chance to wax with paraffin, just make sure you're doing that. All right, edge angles and tuning. This right here, to me, is the most important aspect of the skis. You remember, like talking about the pyramid, is the bottom, is the base of the pyramid in terms of making fast skis. And base bevel is going to control how reactive the skis are. And I used to get customers that come in and they're like, okay, I got a 1 degree on the base and a 2 degree on the side, so effectively I have, you know, they try to figure out this like formula for like what's an effective angle. I like to think of base bevel and side edge bevel as completely independent things. So base bevel is going to control how reactive and quick your skis are. Side edge is going to control how powerful your skis are on edge. So you can have all the best equipment in the world. If that base bevel is not right, your skis just won't work right. You know, you can have the best boots, you can have all the canting done. Where the rubber meets the road is that base bevel. So I'll show you exactly what that is, but if your base bevel is way up and you have to roll way over on edge to get to the edge, your skis aren't going to perform very well. So how it works and how to read it. So base bevel controls how quickly the ski is going to come to edge. So the flatter the base bevel, the quicker the ski is going to be. So too little base bevel will leave the skis feeling edgy and railed or overly aggressive, and some people would actually complain like, hey, these skis are railed, like meaning that the edges are just right into the snow. Too much base bevel leaves the skis feeling dead and damp with no energy. And sometimes there's a fine line between those two things. Once the base bevel's set, and this is the second big takeaway from this clinic, don't burn your skis. The other one too is don't touch your base bevel. Once it's set, it's set. You know, there's no need to touch it again. If there's a ½ degree on the ski, you know, when I grew up skiing, everybody would want to come in after the day of skiing and they pull the file down the base. Every time you touch that base bevel, you're adding bevel, which means that you're degrading the performance of your skis. So don't touch the base bevel. If you feel like you need to, it's probably a good time to take the skis in to get them stone ground and get that bevel cleaned up. The bevel can change and it will change over time too. You know, it's a ski. Going back to that diagram of, you know, the construction of the ski. The ski is always flexing and moving and changing, and that base bevel does change over time just on its own, even when you don't touch the skis at all. So the only way to really know if it's changed, you can see a picture of me here with a true bar, is checking it with a true bar. So Does everybody know what a true bar is? I understand it's just a bar that we use to check the flatness of the ski. How many people here have a true bar? How many people use it? Yeah. So it's a hard thing to use. It's a very small tolerance. The thing I find really interesting about ski tuning to me is these tolerances, you can't see them with your naked eye. You know, you really need a tool, and you got to like work at it to understand what the angles look like. It's not like a wheel on a bike where you can spin it and see that it's out of true. But these little angles make a huge difference in how your skis perform. So the more you use that tool, the better you're going to be at actually identifying the angles and understanding how your skis work. So we're going to talk about a flat ski in a couple different aspects. So there's ski flatness, and then there's base bevel. So a lot of people think, oh, I like to have my skis nice and flat. Well, when I put my true bar on the ski, I'm looking at not only how flat the base material is, but how flat the base bevel is. So there's two different things that we're considering here. And of course, you can't really see it when I hold up a true bar, but you can see the ski is not entirely flat underneath the true bar through the base material. To me, that's not the end of the world. You know, of course, I would want it flat, but it's not really going to affect how the ski performs for the most part. However, this base bevel does. And so that's really what I'm looking at, what I'm really trying to pay most of my attention to is how much base bevel there is. So how do you read it? What is it? So I can put my true bar on this ski, and I can see just a little bit of light right underneath the edge. And so I'm going to exaggerate this, but if there was a big angle here, which is the base bevel, if I put my true bar on there and rolled it up and matched that angle, that's the base bevel. And I don't necessarily even read it right here, I read it 2 inches over. So I go over 2 inches, and at that point right there, depending on how high the bar is, that tells me how much base bevel is on the ski. So I'm going to exaggerate this again. A 1 degree might look like this. A ½ degree looks like this. And so, you know, we do have some pretty sophisticated measuring devices that will actually read it out and show you what's on the ski in terms of base bevel. This is showing just over a ½ degree. You know, we're matching that angle. I can't see any light. That angle right there is where we actually read the base bevel, and it tells us what our angle's at. But kind of a rule of thumb is strips of tape. So I like to think of like a really thin piece of electrical tape as maybe a ¼ degree. So if I put my true bar on the ski, roll it up, and I can get one little thin strip of tape there, maybe it's a ¼ degree, and then we build on that with the idea of adding strips of tape. It's not perfect, but it gives you a basic idea of like what the base bevel is and how to read it. Again, you need to have a lot of practice checking it, and you need to have like a really good source of light too, to be able to see that little tolerance on the base. So how's that translate into your skiing? Base bevel and slope. So I've done a lot of testing when I was working with the national team, and we tested every day. You know, we'd have timing out every single day, and we'd have intervals set up, and usually would have them set up on just based off of the pitch. And you know, for an example, there would be a timer from the start to the flat, through a moderate pitch, through steep, and then to the steepest section. And what I found through testing is the flatter the ski, or the less base bevel, traditionally it kind of works out to be the fastest in, you know, whatever particular section it is. So the 0.25 would be the fastest in the steep section, and the 1 degree would be the fastest on the flat section. So, you know, I always ask this question, like, what are we doing in ski racing? Like, what are we trying to do? We're trying to get down the hill as fast as we can. Like the most direct route is usually going to be the fastest as long as you can make the turn. Well, having more base bevel on the ski in a flat section is going to let the ski drive down the hill more. And so as a technician, if I went to a race and I knew it was a really flat race, I could pick a ski for my athlete without them even really knowing I was making a selection based off of base bevel for flatter terrain, because the skis are just going to go downhill more, and that athlete would need to think about like making a turn. the base bevel is letting the skis drive downhill more. So I thought this was kind of a cool comparison. This is actually from the World Cup in Solden just this last couple weeks ago. And this is Schifrin, and this is, I forget the Austrian girl's name. Anyway, she won the race, but look at the edge angle here. Like, you can see, I can tell just by looking at the ski that the Austrian girl's got more base bevel on her ski. And you can see the line that's letting her drive down the hill much, much more than Michaela. Michaela's very high. She's got a lot of edge angle, and you can see that ski's really hooking up and taking her across the hill. So what do we say? What's the name of the game here? We want to go down the hill, right? So that's the faster line is going to be here. But there's always a fine line between being able to make the turn and not make the turn. And so sometimes people need help, and maybe less base bevel helps them make the turn. There's a lot of testing that goes on there, but that's the basic idea of how that works. So, how to fix too much base bevel. So I'll take a step back here real quick and say, I always like to start out with having less base bevel on the ski. Like, I would rather have a tight half degree on the ski, and I want to see how you, an athlete, actually skis. And I could see, well, they're having a hard time getting their feet out, looks like the skis are hooking up too hard. I could always add some bevel. It's really easy, a couple pulls of a file. But the only way to go back is by taking it to a store or your shop and having them stone grind the ski, flatten the ski out again. So I would always say err on the tighter side and like make an adjustment in the shop with a file, add a little bit of base bevel. It's always the easiest way to go because it's much more difficult to flatten the ski out with a stone grinder. I just was talking about this, base bevel start with less. If the ski's too edgy, you can always add a little bit more bevel. Does anybody have questions on base bevel before we move on to side edge bevel? Easy. Right, side edge bevel is going to control how powerful the ski is on edge. The sharper the edge angle, the more edge holds that you're going to have. But the sharper the edge angle, the less durable the edge is going to be. So, you know, you're not going to get as many runs on that edge before it starts to roll over and becomes less sharp. And here's a diagram showing durability versus power on edge. So a 90 degree is going to be the most durable. That'll probably stay sharp all day. But if you move to a 4 degree, you know, I know a lot of people use 4 degree on their slalom skis. You're probably, in hard snow conditions, you're probably only going to get a few runs on those skis before the edge rolls over, and they're dull. So you have to make sure you have a few pairs of skis on the hill for training to make sure you've got nice sharp skis for the day. So this is easy to measure too. So you can actually check to see what kind of side edge bevel you have on your skis. And we just use a side edge guide and a true bar. So what I do is just put this side edge guide against the base, put your true bar on that, and walk it right down to the edge. And when you hit the edge, you should see no light. That shows that you have a true angle. Now this is even hard to see in my diagrams, but this is showing the true angle. There's no light underneath the edge. If I see light on the base edge side, that means I have less than a 3 degree. It's probably more like a 2 degree. If I have light showing on my side of the ski, that means it's a sharper angle and probably more like a 4 degree. So again, these tolerances are pretty tight, but I was always taught to check at 3 different spots to make sure the angle is correct. So I check the tail, the waist, and the tip, and if everything's at 3 degree, I'm in good shape. What usually ends up happening is that it's a negative angle, and usually the reason why it's a negative angle is because the sidewall material is in the way, and you have to remove that. And I'll show you how to do that with the sidewall tool here. So what I've seen in testing is like an accomplished slalom skier, the difference between a 3 and a 4 degree angle in a 40-second training course could be 0.3 of a second. Like I've seen that consistently show up when testing. And years ago when I had my store, there was an athlete that was a nationally ranked slalom skier. And one day he came into the store and I said to him, hey, what do you have on your skis for side edge angle? And he said, oh, I've got a 4 degree. I'm rocking a 4 degree. And as I was talking to him, I looked at his sidewall material and I could tell it hadn't been removed. So as we were talking, I grabbed my true bar and my side edge guide and I checked it in the tip, tail, and waist. And what he actually had, because he had been sharpening his skis with a 4 degree angle, it will work, but it will pull a negative angle. He won't get the actual 4 degree. And what he actually had on his skis was a 1 degree side edge angle. So imagine that. He had a 1 degree, and the difference between a 3 degree and a 4 degree and a 40-second course could be 0.3 of a second. So 2 runs, he's given up over a half a second. So just taking a few seconds and checking your angles with your true bar goes a long way to make sure that you're getting your optimized performance out of your equipment. So sharpening your skis, you're going to need a few things. You're going to need a sidewall cutter. That's going to be this tool right here for removing that sidewall. You're going to need a file brush to make sure that your file stays nice and clean and it will last longer. And then we're going to have a medium race file, which is going to be this guy right here. That's called a 13 tooth per centimeter. To me, this one works the best. They last the longest. They are a bit more aggressive. They make finer files, but we're going to go through some diamond stones to clean up that file after we're done. And then 3 diamond stones works well for me. And then I like to use a ceramic stone on the base to adjust that burr that we're going to create when we file the ski. So there's a lot of different sidewall planers out there. So this is the World Cup version. It's very adjustable. This is more the economy version. This is pretty inexpensive. It's not as adjustable, but it actually works great. This is a really nice tool to have, especially if you're getting started. And on one side there's a round blade, and on the other side there's a square blade. I actually recommend that people not use that square blade. It's more of an advanced tool in my opinion, but I do like that round blade. It works pretty well. So what we're going to do is we're really going to focus on removing that base material right above the edge. So what happens in the factory is these skis are laid up in a mold and they're basically vertical when they come out of the mold. And you'll see when you look closely at the sidewall here, you can see a rilled kind of sanded or shaped sidewall, but they always leave like a little bit of material right above the edge that kind of matches the edge itself. That material's got to go in order to get that edge angle set. If we don't remove it, what's going to happen is we'll pull that negative angle that we talked about. So this is it in more detail. Also, the tips and tails, for the most part, probably need some sort of shaping to get that vertical sidewall material out of the waist, because that sander does stop about right here. These skis, you can really see it quite clearly, and the tail stops right there. So a lot of technicians will shape that last part of the ski and then pull back that sidewall material. What's that?
How do you shape it?
Yeah, so that's a little bit more difficult. Like a lot of times you use like a body, like a Panzer file, a bigger file, and you know, wearing some gloves, it actually just kind of shape that top sheet, kind of pull it back, recess it, and get it out of the way. You know, we're kind of building the taper like that into it. This is like from the factory. That's that part that I was talking about that we need to remove, and then we just take that blade and pull it back. But in the tips and tails, we want to kind of mirror that look. And that's kind of more advanced. You know, as you guys are getting started, I would say don't mess around with that. Leave that to the people in the shop to kind of get that set up. I've seen some people really screw up their skis not understanding how to do that. If you do it, maybe start out with your mom and dad's skis and save the race skis for later. I did see somebody do it one time years ago, and they whittled right through the sidewall so you could see the core of the ski. They went a little too far, but. Right, so I'm going to pull back that sidewall before we get going. So I'm just going to take this tool, I'm going to lay it right up next to the edge. And this ski is kind of interesting because there's the construction, there's a sheet of Titanol right above the edge itself. So we want to remove that sidewall material, and also that little sheet of Titanol's got to go too, because that will pull a negative angle. So I'm going to set this blade up right at the sidewall. And, you know, we're going to pull off sidewall material. You can even see there's a little bit of metal in there too from that Titanal sheet. You don't want to hit the edge. You want to get as close to the edge as you can without touching the edge. But you're going to make a couple of passes like that. You can even work in smaller sections like this. Now, once you do this, you're in good shape for a little while. Like basically, my rule of thumb is probably every third or fourth time that I sharpen, I'm going to have to do that again. Because as you sharpen, that edge is going to get closer to the sidewall material, and then you got to pull it back out of the way again. But you can take your true bar when you're done, just you can see that that sidewall material is out of the way, and you're good to sharpen your skis. Any questions on that?
I feel like the shop up there, like, they take a huge amount of sidewalk off. Should you take a lot of sidewalk off, like right at the beginning of the season, or is it?
Yeah. I think that, like, in my opinion, I think like you want to take enough that it's easy for the athletes to work on the skis. I think less is always more a lot of times, but you know, as long as it's not, you know, that's where the problem is with that square blade is I've seen a lot of people just go right in with that square blade and go way far. And what it ends up doing is it creates like a hot edge on the top of the edge and the bottom of the edge. And so this round blade keeps that from happening. It's like, maybe it's a way that you don't remove too much sidewall material because it just sculpts it out, and then you have to go back and do it again eventually. Less is usually more though. All right, so now we're ready to sharpen, but before we can sharpen, if you're ever out skiing, you know, there's a good chance that you hit some rocks or debris in the snow. Anytime you hit anything like that with your edge, it creates heat, which creates case hardening. So your file won't cut through that case hardening very easy. So you gotta prep it beforehand. And a lot of times I'll just use like a coarse 200 stone, and I'll use it with my side edge guide here in a clamp. And I'll just run it up and down the edge really quick. Just to take any of that case hardening off, you'll hear the edge kind of smooth out as you go. And once you've done that, it's going to make it a lot easier to actually file your ski. And that's, you're always going to want to start with that before you actually get into sharpening. All right, so when sharpening by hand with a file, it's important to follow these guidelines here. So make sure you use a hard clamp or C-clamp to make sure that the file stays in place. So this is more of a safety thing. And of course I don't have a clamp with me here today, but I see a lot of people file by using a spring clamp like this. This will actually move and you'll pull a negative angle. And also when you're learning how to file, there's a good chance that you could slip and cut your hand. A lot of people, when they're filing too, they're kind of like doing this one-handed deal. I would always make sure that when you're filing, work in small sections, pull right to your hip, 2 hands. So you're gonna have this clamp down with the C-clamp, hold it down, push in, pull down. Keep that file close to you. You're gonna have more control over it as you're filing. Also, when you're filing, you wanna make sure that you pull the same material off here as you do along the whole length of the ski. You can actually change the radius of the ski. You can put more turn radius into the skis if you're not careful with that. A lot of times with junior tuning, I might look at the ski and think, oh man, they're like brand new skis. And then I look underfoot and they're like paper thin. So you could add an extra 2 meters of turn radius to a ski by tuning like that. So you have to be really careful to pull the same amount along the whole length of the ski. And make sure that you use a file that's basically the same size as the guide itself. Like this is not the correct setup. This is too long, especially with a slalom ski. This file might actually get hung up point to point and not really follow the turn radius of the ski itself. So a lot of times I just break this file in half and then you have 2 pieces. And That's pretty simple. You can put it on the table, just give it a quick, I'm not gonna be able to do it now. Snap like that, and that's the size that you want to use. So again, I would want to use like a woodworking C-clamp, something small. A lot of the guys actually have a clamp built right into them, but because I don't have it, I'm going to use this. You can always want to make sure you're wearing some gloves too. This will protect you from getting a cut. You know, a lot of people cut their hands tuning, but also you're going to create some like metal filings. When I had my store, because I did this so much, I actually had a rusty palm because I had so much base, like edge material in my hand. So it's a good idea to wear gloves.
Hey Graham, I want to touch base about that. I know a lot of, like, we have a young crowd here, and learning how to swim is a lot of trial and error. So I feel like I ended up so many times having to take dates because they cut themselves.
Yeah.
And especially because of the sequence that you pointed out and putting too much pressure and not having a glove. Quite a lot of injuries happen in the season, not paying attention, rushing through the process.
Yeah.
I think it's really important to have a glove and get used to it and find the right glove. It's really important to make sure you have the sequence, not the regular clamp that you used to use the clamp. It just helps you be more consistent and safer through the process.
Yeah, so again, I can't say it enough, like that two-handed technique is going to be really safe. And actually you're going to have better results too. You know, like make sure that you're pulling in and pushing down and just pull, think about pulling right to your hip. And this table is likely too high for most of you here. You know, so like think about a table, if you have adjustable legs on your tables in Colorado, drop them down a bit. You know, try to get it set up so the athletes, you know, the skis at the hip height. You know, I see a lot of U12s, so they're up here tuning. That's not a great comfortable position. It's not very powerful. So I think the ergonomics of the setup go a long way too. All right, so I just talked about all this with removing the edge material. I'll just do it real quick. So I'll start up on the tip. If I'm going to make 5 pulls here, I'm going to move on to the next section with 5 pulls. And just kind of keep that going right down the edge. And I'm actually pushing with like moderate pressure. So I'm kind of letting the file kind of do its thing. The sidewall material is out of the way, so I don't have to really fight with the ski. And then when I get down the edge, I can just wipe it off. And then I would take my true bar and my guide and check to see if I had the correct angle. And if it's all good, I'm ready to move on to the next step, which is going to be diamond stones. So diamond stones are like miniature files. They actually will add bevel on a base. You know, for me personally, the only thing I ever touch the base with is a ceramic stone. I've seen people actually polish the base edge so much they added bevel with these. So I would stay away from using anything like this on the base edge. But on the side edge, they work great. So what we did with that filing was we ripped the edge apart to create a nice, sharp feeling ski. I mean, they feel amazing, super sharp. But there's a big burr that's hanging off the ski here. And what we want to do is go through a progression where we create a smaller burr. So big burr's hanging off here, the skis feel really sharp. I'm going to take my ceramic stone and I'm going to roll it up right at that point where the base edge and side edge come together. So just to exaggerate it, it's right against the base edge, and I'm going to roll it up where the side edge is, and I'm going to run it down the ski. Basically, if you took a dime and slid it underneath that side of the ceramic stone, that's kind of the angle you want to hold it at, but I'm going to push that burr back up. So I just did all this work to sharpen the ski. It felt super sharp and amazing. Now it doesn't feel that great. I just rolled that burr back. But I'm going to go right into my 200 gram diamond stone.
How much pressure do you put on that when you're going across?
Kind of like decent pressure.
Decent
You know, I don't know how to explain it. Like, you know, I'm pushing. You know, I'm pushing that burr up. Now I'm going to my 200 grit diamond, and it's going to create another burr, but it's going to be smoother than our original. So there's the play between creating a burr, knocking it back, creating a smaller burr, knocking it back, and you're going to go back and forth until you have a really nice, smooth, clean edge. I'll take that ceramic stone again. Now I'm pushing up a little bit lighter than I did the first time. And I'll go into my next diamond stone, which is the 400. I like 3 diamond stones. You know, you could probably just do 1. Some people go through 8. The further you go, the sharper and smoother the edge is. But I feel like at a certain point, there's like, it's not helping that much. All right, so now they feel nice and sharp. You know, they're getting sharper too as I go. I'm gonna push that burr up a bit. And just for right now, I'm gonna stop there. So, technically speaking, like these to me, nice and sharp, kind of generically sharp, they're ready to go out on the snow. And I'd rather have the skis really sharp here and go out to the snow and make adjustments. It's always easier to make the ski less sharp if you need to. It's harder to make it sharp when you're on the hill. You guys have any questions about that play between creating a burr, knocking it back, and kind of working back and forth?
How do you keep your diamond stones clean?
It's a good question. So I don't. Like I just throw them away and I get new ones, but I have a wholesale account, so it's pretty cheap for me. But the best way to do it, I think, is just keep like a little cup of water around and drop it in. When you're done tuning at the end of the day, take your little file brush, just clean it, stick it back in the water. These don't last long. You know, like I'll say, there's a lot of consumables with ski tuning. A file, diamond stones. A file really is only going to last about, I mean, to be effective, is probably going to last about 30 sharpens. And same with these, they'll only last about 30 sharpens. Now the thing that's kind of a bummer about a file is you really only use half of it. You know, like if I'm right-handed, I'm only using that side of it and that side of it. And at my store, you know, we'd go through so many files, like we'd throw it in a bucket, and halfway through the year, I'd start pulling left-handed so I could use all 4 sides of the file because I'm cheap. But anyways, that's a trick that you can get a little bit extra out of your files if you want. But unfortunately, these diamond stones, they just don't last that long. You can use sandpaper, it does work. You know, you wrap sandpaper around a small file. But these, you know, it's just something that you have to, what I found is most of the time people wait too long and they're really kind of worn out before they actually replace them. Yeah.
What's your thought on 100 grit diamond instead of using the file? I find that for the kids, like messing with the file, they use 100 grit diamond network.
Yeah, so I'm not crazy about the 100 grit just because I feel like it's so aggressive. You know, like I don't like how it feels. I think maybe instead of a file, actually it's not a bad idea. But I like that 200, 400, 600, that's the range I'm usually in. But I can tell you just for me personally, I just don't like how it feels. It is very aggressive.
Well, I'm trying to save the HPC. So.
Yeah, I think replace, like instead of using a file, like if you're just not there with the file, this is not a bad option. Yeah. Okay, so as I mentioned, the final edge is nice and sharp and burr-free, and they're generically sharp. With GS and slalom skiing, to me, like, I'm gonna jump ahead a little bit here. The trick to having fast skis in GS and slalom skiing is really the edge sharpness for the conditions. Like, I'm not too concerned about like the speed on the structure. You know, a lot of people are like, oh man, I wax these skis so much and the structure's super fast, but I don't want to take all that speed out of the ski. Well, if the base bevel's wrong, like the speed of the slalom GS ski, it doesn't matter at all. Like the base bevel matters more than anything. But anyways, like I'll use this story. So I was with a national team athlete. We were at we're at Winter Park for an early season race before the Park City opening World Cup. And it was super dry, grippy snow. You guys are going to Colorado. You're going to experience this. Super dry, grippy snow. And the skis were sharp. And it was first run, and she didn't have a great run. And she was complaining that the skis were too sharp. And I was talking to my boss, who was an Austrian coach, and he's like, she's crazy. The skis are fine. You know, and then I was rooming with the guy, and I went into our room late at night, and he was on the phone with the head guy from the ski team, and he said, Graham made the skis too sharp first run. She had a horrible first run. And I was like, man, that's never going to happen again. So what I'd say is, like, the skis are sharp. You got to kind of dial them in for dry, grippy snow. And where I'm going with this is, like, ski on the skis before the race. Like you're not going to ruin the speed of the ski. You know, it's not going to be a big deal with the wax, but you can never get that first run back. So what I would do is, like, when it's really dry, grippy snow, have like a ceramic stone. When it's really dry, grippy, you can make that push back up the base edge again, just kind of push that burr up if there's anything there. And then you can take a gummy stone. I don't think I have a gummy stone here with me. Essentially, it's kind of the shape of this cork. But what I like to do is I progressively make the ski less sharp from about the heel to the tail of the ski. So I'd make 1 pass, 2 passes, 3 passes. Right about the heel of the boot, I'm going to stop. So now progressively the ski's less sharp to the tail. I'll make 1 pass gently up to the tip, and I'll kind of do the same thing in the tip, pull back the edge sharpness in this area. So once you do that, in those dry, grippy conditions, you set the ski up so now you can stivot and slide, and the back of the ski isn't going to hook up too hard, and kind of lets you articulate and stivot in those really dry, grippy snow conditions. That's the hardest thing to do as a technician, is kind of dial that in. But I would recommend to you guys, like, ski on your skis. Make sure they're not too grippy. Find like some snow that's similar to the race hill. You can always refresh the wax, but you can never get that first run back. So that's kind of my best advice to you. Now, I wanted to show you this tool. I don't have it here with me. We ordered a few for the store, but they didn't show up on time. But this is a little edger. It's a machine edger. A lot of these tools, they're very popular now. They work great for slalom and GS skis. They're super easy to use. What's nice about them is just with a couple of simple passes, your skis are sharp. I do have a video I think I could maybe show you of it in action. Let me see if I can pull it up here. So, it's not showing up here. It's not going to work. Anyways, it's a nice option for sharpening your skis. You still have to pull back the sidewall material and make sure everything's kind of pulled back and out of the way, just like you would with your file, because the machine won't tune through that sidewall material. But it creates a little bit of heat when you sharpen, which lets the edge stay sharper longer. And what's really cool about the machine is it sweeps up the edge while it's sharpening, so it doesn't leave a burr. So you can just make a couple passes with this machine and the skis are ready to go ski on. It makes it quite simple to tune. And like when my daughter was a U12, like I sharpened and race waxed her skis with liquid waxes in that machine in like 4.5 minutes. So it's very quick. It's an easy way to tune the skis. But if you're interested in that, you know, you can always stop by the store and I can show you a demo. But unfortunately, I don't have it here with me today. So, yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about protecting the base with some tape, or making sure you're cleaning those bases well enough that you're not ironing in?
Yeah.
Filings?
That's a good question. Yeah, like I just sharpened the ski, right? So like there's actually like metal, I can see it in the base. I'm gonna take that scraper that's nice and sharp. After I'm done sharpening, I'm just gonna go over the ski and make sure I clean any of that metal debris out. And maybe I'll take that medium metal brush and just brush it really good to make sure there's no metal in the ski before I do any ironing. Some people will actually go as far as, I remember when I was doing a lot of skis, I had a streak where I had like scraped up my bevel guides, and I don't know how I was doing it, but it happened a few times and I really gouged my base material. So a lot of technicians will actually take this PVC tape and they'll lay it right on the base like this to protect the ski from the actual tool or any burrs that might create a any damage to the base material. So you can see when we're tuning that that's going to kind of protect that base and make for a nice smooth finish. The only thing with it is there is some adhesive that's going to stick to the ski, and it's not really a big deal. You know, you can go back, like that's where this stuff would really excel and clean any adhesive off the base before you wax. Any other questions? Cool. Well, I got some stuff for everybody here.
Well, Graham, thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, of course. I got the folks over at SWIX were really nice. They gave me a swag bag of stuff for you to grab some stuff here. But there's some aprons, there's some hats, a bunch of shirts, scrapers.
Thank you, Graham.